Hi everyone, I'm Neal Katyal, and this is The New Normal, a digital salon where we talk about life in the age of COVID-19. Today we've got a very special episode in honor of the upcoming streaming release of Hamilton, the musical. We are joined by two of the very leading historians of American history. They're not just phenomenal scholars, they are incredibly gifted teachers as well, and I've had many of my own students and colleagues rave about their teaching. First up, we have Annette Gordon-Reed, who is the Charles Warren Professor of Legal History at Harvard Law School. She wrote the book The Hemmingses of Monticello, which won the Pulitzer, and have written books about Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Johnson. Her latest book is Most Blessed of the Patriarchs, Thomas Jefferson and the Empire of the Imagination, which I have on my bookshelf. I haven't gotten to it, but I have it, and it's right next to the Eric Foner. Joanne Freeman is a professor of history at Yale. She recently wrote Field of Blood, Congressional Violence in Antebellum America, which I'm also trying to get to. But prior to that, she wrote Affairs of Honor, which, among other things, covered dueling in detail and is one of my very favorite books about American history. She's also a certified Hamilton expert. Affairs of Honor gets into this a little bit, but her other scholarship does. Among other things, she edited a volume of Alexander Hamilton's writings. We start this by basically just asking the guests every time just how they're doing. This is such a tough time, both coronavirus and all the recent race relations stuff. And so I'm curious how just each of you are holding up. Annette, why don't we start with you?
Well, I'm holding up pretty well, I guess I should say. We have gone through a lot here in Manhattan. I've been in Manhattan during all of this and have watched things rise and fall. And now we're at a point of sort of a point where everybody can sort of take their breath, and we're sort of calming down now. But then all of the questions about, the death of George Floyd, monuments, I'm fielding and turning down. It seems like every 15 minutes, a request to talk about monuments, which I've written about before. It's an interesting time. I feel strangely optimistic, but it's weird. It's just I feel weird. I don't know what to expect next.
I mean, I suppose I would say also, I think I'm basically okay. I was in New York for the entire thing as well. And it's nice to look out of the window and see more people in the street. It feels more normal. But there's so much going on, as Annette just suggested. And I think historians get asked such interesting ongoing questions in this moment. I keep being asked to talk about, as a historian, what does it feel like at this moment, right? Well, I could write about that, and every other historian has their ideas about it. But it's I think weird. I'll go with Annette's weird. It's a weird kind of moment.
Is there much precedent for historians thinking about history at the moment, Joanne? I mean, I would think what you do, the virtue, the kind of the key thing is almost to have some distance and to actually be living it and then try and analyze it. I would think it seems very fraught.
Well, yeah, I mean, distance is good, but I think the experience I'm having now is that I find myself thinking my way through things and then stepping back and saying, wow, I had to think that through. That in itself is really weird and significant. So, as a teacher, when I teach the Constitution, I would always say to the students, well, it's a basic framework and it's very short considering what it does, blah, blah, blah. And now, we've seen all of these different norms get stripped away. And my initial response was, wow, it's really just a framework. It's propped up by a lot of norms. So it's not.
That mere parchment barriers line is looking really good these days.
Yeah, well, and for me, I teach criminal procedure. So this is the colliding worlds for me to have been teaching for the past 27 years, criminal procedure, talking about qualified immunity, and to have people discussing qualified immunity, the kind of thing I talk to with my students all the time, is just amazing. All these concepts and issues that, that have come to the fore in my classes are here. But then there's the historical part of it as well. So it's a clash for me, a clash of subjects that have come to fore here. Someone asked me yesterday on an interview, have you is there another time like this? And what does this remind you of? So Joanne would think about, and we would think about, well, the 1850s and 1840s are pretty rough in terms of partisanship and so forth. Hopefully we're not that far gone. But then the Spanish flu, then the Depression. And I said, we have all these things at once. It's amazing. You can go in any direction and think about the history and think about policy, all those things together. I just can't think of another time that's so chock full with these contrasting and converging kinds of interests.
You think to yourself, even though this is a goofy, naive thing almost for historians to say, it's like every moment you're thinking, history is happening. Like,
I know.
Right?
I said to my son the other day, I'm tired of living in history. I mean, we could.
I know. Give me boring.
I know. Give me something. Go back to those, some everyday kind of mundane things. Shark attacks. Let's go back to the, shark attacks. Not all of this stuff.
Or the president wearing a brown suit or something.
I know, exactly. And he came out and the suit was beige. It's like, please. Rescue us.
Well, let me ask you both. Let's, just backing up for a second to talk about American history generally, not Hamilton specifically, but just both of you are such serious scholars of the founding. And when I grew up, at least, as a minority, I think there was just such a reflexive view, like, oh, don't bother studying those people. Those people are slavers. Don't celebrate them. Don't learn about them. And obviously, both of your career trajectories, you study lots of things, but one of the things both of you do study are the founders and their, in what they were about. So, as scholars of these folks, what made you pick the career choice you did? Inspired you to study not just American history generally, but really devote a good chunk of your life to the lives of these founders. Joanne, why don't we start with you?
Well, part of the answer to that, I guess, is the Bicentennial, right? So I was of the right age. I was, 13, 14 when the Bicentennial happened. And so the period that I basically really studied was everywhere. And granted, it was goofy, highfalutin, dead white guy history of a sort. But what it showed me, and in particular, actually, the play 1776, which is sort of the pseudo-Hamilton of its moment, taught me that this time period had real people in it, right? And that I wanted to read books because I wanted to understand who the real people were. I don't think I had any real confrontation with the history of this period or the people in it before the Bicentennial, and because it started me reading, it kind of set me off, and I ultimately landed on Hamilton. And they're
actually, Joanne, sorry to cut you off, but I think I saw something, maybe a tweet by you. Didn't you have like a paper when you were like 10 about Hamilton or something like that? That you were was that part of the Bicentennial stuff? Is that
was a little before it, because there was a lead up to the Bicentennial. So yeah, I had to write. I don't remember what grade I was in. I had to write a historic event as though it was a newspaper article with a headline and everything. And I saved it for some reason, and mine is titled Hamilton Killed in Duel. From like 7th grade or 6th grade. But what's amazing about it is it's all taken from primary material. So it's taken from letters of people at the time, right? Which is what I was interested in. It was like, this is the real stuff of history. So that kind of, I guess, shows where I was headed.
And Annette, how did you get into it?
Well, I should say, to your lead in here, this is a particularly fraught subject for me because I'm African American. And the question is, what's up with that? I became interested in Jefferson and Monticello as a 3rd grader, reading one of those child's biographies of Jefferson. And I found him an interesting subject, the idea that a person who, because it shows in the book that he owned slaves, and as a boy he was living on a plantation, and at the same time he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And I thought that was sort of interesting, that a person, slavery, all men are created equal, that kind of thing. And then it just developed from there. I read Winthrop Jordan's White Over Black when I was about 12. There was a chapter in there called Thomas Jefferson's Self and Society. And it talked about that was the first time I'd heard anything about the Hemmings, is I'd been reading biographies of sort of child-appropriate biographies of Jefferson up until then. And that was a different twist. And then I read Fawn Brody's book about Jefferson, and that had Madison Hemmings's recollections in it. And that interested me more because I began to think about, that was the first narrative of an enslaved person. And as Joanne said, I mean, the founders are not, it's not just about studying them as people. They lived in a society, in a context. And there are people all around them that are fascinating. And you can, if you learn about those people, not only do you learn about that individual, you learn about those people and that society. So, and I was a biography person. I mean, I grew up reading biographies of all kinds, and that gave me a sense of the past, past societies. And so that interested me. So that's how I got into it. I never thought, oh, I shouldn't study this subject because Jefferson is a white guy, a dead white guy. It's that, well, this is an interesting person, a person who mattered in his time, who gave us ideals, who said things, whether he believed them all or not, that we have taken to heart and have helped shape society. Plus, there's an interesting cast of characters around him as well. So it was a no-brainer for me.
Thanks so much for joining The New Normal. In a couple of days, we're going to have installment 2 with Professors Annette Gordon-Reed and Professor Joanne Freeman.